Hi, and welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Roscoe. Today we're going to be building on my earlier videos about inventory management and how companies have been managing inventory during the pandemic as inflation has rose, as well as the interest rates are climbing. And if you haven't had a chance, please go and watch those videos. Now we're going to be getting to a bit more of an applied concept, looking at what's called economic order qualifiers, pardon me, as well as a system sort of prioritizing your inventory and why companies do that. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand the trade-offs and costs between inventory holding. And what I'll talk a little bit about here is the cost of inventory. And I've talked in my other videos sort of the primary cost of inventory. And again, this is because when we have long and global supply chains and we have demand in North America and we have supply in Southeast Asia and we have a supply chain that can take a year, what we have throughout that supply chain is a year's worth of inventory. And that is sort of the longer our process gets, the longer our flow time is, the more inventory that we have to hold, whether that's finished goods inventory, that's work in progress inventory, or that is raw material inventory. So essentially what we're doing with this EOQ is we're trying to understand how much stock we should order based on a couple of key factors, and we'll go through that as we talk. Now, we're trying to find out how much do we order at a particular point in time and when the stock item should be ordered. I will say that the EOQ formula is built into a lot of companies' order management software. It's also built into their ERP systems. And what we're trying to do is understand sort of the concepts behind these, behind why companies order in such a way. So we're trying to balance how much we buy, that's our inventory lot size. We're trying to balance our lead times from when we place the order to when we receive it. And we're also trying to avoid stockouts. And we're trying to understand what is our reorder point and what is the amount of safety stock that we need. So essentially what you can see in this particular diagram is that we receive an order and we place our order for a particular quantity. And this shows that our demand rate is falling at a relatively stable rate over a period of time. And then I have the lead time, like I mentioned, from how long it takes me to place an order and get it delivered from a customer. Okay, now this is a better example because it shows you with numbers. If I ordered 400 items of, let's say, Coca-Cola, I buy those 400 items every week. I consume 100 units, or my customers come and buy 100 units. And within 4 weeks, I'm down to zero stock. Now, what I have to consider, though, is the lead time that my customers will take to deliver to me. And that is 2 weeks in this particular example. So basically, that means every 2 weeks, I have to be placing an additional order for 400 units so I don't run out of stock. Okay, and that's taking into account my lead times and my reorder point. Now, what I could also do, though, is if I'm able to condense that lead time, so let's say instead of my suppliers delivering every 2 weeks, my suppliers could deliver every, let's say, 2.5 days. And what I can do is I can order less and I can order it more often. So there's some advantages of doing that. If I place a large order, my ordering cost, the cost it takes me to raise the purchase order, the administrative time to place that purchase order with a supplier and secure the order and get it delivered, those costs will be less on a per unit basis because I'm buying 400 units and it costs me a fixed amount of, let's say, $25 to place an order. Now, if I only ordered 100 units, I still have to pay $25, so the cost per unit of ordering is higher. But I have some advantages. Now, if I can have these 100 units delivered every 2.5 days, basically that means that I have higher ordering costs, yes, but I don't need as big of a warehouse. I can have less storage space. I can have less overheads in my warehouse. And it also means that as I have stock coming in regularly, if I see a change in demand, it basically means I can increase my order or I can decrease my order based on that demand. I don't have to wait 2 weeks or even 4 weeks to get that stock in. Okay, so that has some advantages when ordering less and having shorter lead times. Now, EOQ systems are good when the usage rate is reasonably constant. So if my demand rate and usage is relatively constant, it helps me sort of to understand that when I need to order, because I know I'm going to be using the same amount every week. In a lot of businesses, obviously, this is not the case, but the assumptions help us understand why the trade-offs between ordering costs and holding costs, and I'll explain that in a second. The other thing that we have to think about is our lead times are assumed that our suppliers can deliver regularly at the same time, and that we have this sort of consistent ability to manage and sort of monitor our stock rates. So this particular graph is quite good because it shows you what we're trying to get to in our EOQ. You can see here that we have our holding costs that increase. So the more stock that we buy, the more it costs us to hold it, obviously, because when we have 50 units, we might need a little bit of space in our warehouse, but if we have 400 units, we need more space, we need more trucks to deliver it, we need more forklifts to move it around. And we also have costs such as working capital being tied up in that inventory, and that brings in inventory carrying costs. And that can be quite high the more that we order. Now, we also have ordering costs, like I explained. My ordering costs come down on a per unit basis the more that I order. If I order 50 units, it would cost me like $350 to buy it. But if my ordering costs come down, then I can the same order that I raised, if it was $50 to buy 100 units, it could also be $50 to purchase 400 units, for instance. So my ordering costs come down on a per unit basis. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get the lowest point of that total cost curve there. And you can see where that's when those two lines sort of intersect with each other, and that total cost curve is as low as possible. And that's suggesting in this graph that we would order around 200 units. So just as a quick example here, Coca-Cola, like I like to use for an example here, if I was in a mom and pop shop, I know that I sell 860 cans of Coke per day. My shop is open 250 days a year because of holidays and weekends. It costs me $1.20 to buy a 6-pack of Coke. Those are my purchasing costs. I know that my annual holding cost for inventory is 10%. So that basically takes into account holding stock on shelves, my warehouse. It accounts for my working capital that's tied up in that inventory. And I've estimated that in this example to be around 10%. And then, like I said before, to raise an order with a supplier can cost around $25 in terms of my time to raise that order. In this particular example, I have my demand, and I need to understand to get my EOQ, I have to understand what is my demand per year, and that becomes my D. And in this instance, it's 860 cans times 250 days a year that my shop is open. So my demand is 215,000 units. Now I also began to calculate my I, which is my inventory carrying costs. And here what I've done is I've just tried to find out what is my sort of cost per can. So I just did 120 divided by 6 cans. And I multiplied that by my 10% holding costs. And that's giving me around 2 cents per can to hold that in stock. What you can see here, though, is in that formula, my EOQ formula at the bottom, is the square root of 2 times my demand times my S, which is my fixed cost per order, divided by my purchase cost per item times my inventory carrying costs, okay? So essentially what we're looking at here is 2 times 215,000, which is my annual demand, times $25 to raise my order, divided by my P times my I, which is my purchasing cost per item, 120 divided by 6 times 10%, so 0.02. And based on that formula, what this tells us is that I need to order 23,000 cans. Now, if I know that I need to order 23,000 cans and I know my demand is around 215,000 cans a year, that basically means I need to order around 9.5 times per year, around 10 times per year, roughly that amount, okay? And that will account for all of the trade-offs within my EOQ formula. So obviously there's disadvantages here. We're assuming that usage rate and that demand is constant. We know that when a new order is delivered, then my inventory is at 0, okay? In a lot of instances, that's not the case. What we want to try to do is build in a buffer. One of the things that I would say is businesses will try to establish what that buffer should be through experience based on what their customers expect. And that can be some businesses who are on a very lean very efficient supply chain, want to keep their inventory holding very low. They might have a buffer, or they might have no buffer at all, but they might have 1-2%. Other businesses, pharmaceuticals, any sort of high quality, high end type of operation might want to have a higher buffer, 20%, to make sure that they're able to fulfill customer orders, and they sort of absorb those costs by charging higher margins. Okay, it also says that there's a lack of inflation. In today's world, inflation is rampant, so that means that we're sort of assuming that our costs here are fixed, but our costs will obviously increase, and we have to work that into our formula. Okay, the last thing I want to just talk about here is this ABC analysis. Now, an ABC analysis is a fairly simple sort of prioritization tool. And what it does is it helps businesses understand which items do I need to prioritize. And basically, the theory here is that 20% of my items generate 80% of the value or the money that I bring into my business. So you can see here that value can be broadly defined. Value could be margins, but value can also be sort of how much the customer values a particular product, such as, let's say, PPE during the pandemic, and PPE had to be prioritized because it was very high value for patients and for the medical staff. So essentially what we're trying to do is we assume that 20% of our items account for 80% of value. Then we have these B items that are next 30% of items, and they account for 10% of the value. And then we have these C class items. So essentially what it says is that my A items are this 80%. I have this sort of B items, which are in the middle. And then I have this really long tail of C items at the end. And what I'm trying to do as a business, especially when I'm doing things like stock counts and where I'm positioning this stuff in my distribution center, it has to be at the front, it has to be easily to access my A items because it's moving very quickly. It's generating a lot of revenue for me as a business. And I also want to make sure with those C items that I'm either discontinuing them entirely because they're not generating enough money for me and I'm holding them and it's kept costing me money, or I want to understand, are those products linked to something else? And I use the example of in a hospital, I might have some C items where I have like a vaccine, I need a syringe, and I need a vial to hold the vaccine. And those things are sort of what are called co-related items. So I might hold C items just because they're important for the sale of A items as well. So finally, what we try to do is we find out the annual usage for each item. We then take the value of the item. So we take our usage or our demand times our cost, and then our items are ranked in descending order. We look at the cumulative total for those items, and then we just convert them into percentages, finding out what are those 20% of items. They equal 80% of my value, etc. Okay. So we have to also take into account ABC analysis is very valuable. Like if I am doing a stock count, I want to prioritize those A items first to make sure they're counted accurately. They're uploaded into my ERP system. I have really good visibility of those A items. And then in terms of priority, the C items could be done later. They could be done last because they're not as sort of critical to my business. However, I might be in a business that has perishables, for instance, and perishables have to be prioritized regardless because they can go off and they can become obsolete. So I have to consider that as well. Okay, so hopefully that's useful on EOQ and ABC, some more in-depth applied ideas around inventory management, and I will leave it there. So thank you everybody for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.